All right, greetings and welcome everyone. I'm Dr. Joanna Dreiling. I'm the program chair for the School of Education at American InterContinental University. And it's my honor to introduce you to Dr. Mark LaCelle-Peterson. So if I could provide a little bit of biographical information for y'all, Dr. LaCelle-Peterson has quite the resume. Dr. Mark LaCelle-Peterson serves as the founding president of the Association for Advancing Quality in Educator Preparation, or AAQEP, an accrediting agency founded in 2017 to strengthen P-12 education through excellent, innovative preparation of educators. He's worked in accreditation and educator preparation for 3 decades, serving on the faculty and leading several educator preparation programs in New York State. He served as president of the Teacher Education Accreditation Council, or TEAC, senior vice president for the Council for Accreditation of Educator Preparation, which is CAPE, and senior vice president for programs at the American Association of Colleges for Teacher Education, or AACTE. His teaching credits include assessment, history of education, foundations of education, research methods, humanities, and Anglo-Saxon and Old Norse literature. A native of Minnesota, he holds degrees from the University of Minnesota, his BA and MA, and from Harvard University's Graduate School of Education, his EDM and EDD. He lives in Rochester, New York, with his family and canine companions. So thank you so much, Dr. LaCelle-Peterson, for being with us today, for sharing your insights about the future of education.
It's a pleasure.
Also with us, oh, thank you.
It's a pleasure, and I hope my canine companions stay quiet throughout the recording. Sorry to go off script.
Oh, no problem at all. I've got 2 canine companions as well, and they like to get involved in the meetings. Zoom world we live in now. Also with us today are Kristen McCabe, Senior Director of Communication and Marketing for AAQEP, Dr. Jeanette K. Jones, Dean of the School of Education at AIU, and Dr. John Mendez, lead faculty for the School of Education at AIU. So thank you all so much for being with us today. All right, so if we could just jump into the questions. For the first question, can you give us a brief overview of what AAQEP is for those of us who may be unfamiliar with the organization, and why programmatic accreditation is important to educational stakeholders?
Super. Well, to take the first part of that, the what, AAQEP is a quality assurance agency. Specifically, we're a national programmatic accreditor, and that means we work with the entities that prepare educators, teachers and other educators like principals, and we work to provide the public with assurance that they are well prepared. So what that means is we have a set of standards that were developed by professionals from across the country, and those standards are used by members like AIU to evaluate themselves first through a self-study, gathering evidence on what you're doing in relation to the standards, in relation to your own goals and things, and producing a self-study. And then the second round of evaluation is a peer process where a team comes in, and I had the privilege of being part of the team that came to AIU, along with some colleagues, to do a review of the evidence, and then it's passed along to an accreditation commission that makes the decision, which can lead to the award of accreditation, which was the case with AIU. So that's essentially what we are as an organization. As to why that matters and why it's important, I think I'd like to just mention 3 things. First, as educators, we know that whenever we go through a structured observation process and interact with our peers about things, we just get smarter and better about what we do. So there's a real intrinsic benefit to doing this. Secondly, because we do perform as educator preparers, we perform a very important public function of preparing teachers for schools across the country. It's really important that we provide some public evidence of that. And so the third-party validation that comes from putting yourself out for an accreditation review basically says, we're not just great because we're great. We put our evidence out there, and other people have come and taken a look at it, right? We've been transparent. We've been upfront with people. And then the third thing is by engaging in accreditation processes, institutions can learn from each other through the peer review, through the conversation with others. And here's what's kind of fun. When AAQEP was put together, we really wanted to accentuate that function. So in AAQEP, we've tried to create a number of different ways that people can participate with monthly cohort meetings, with various kinds of exchanges, so that we always like to say, we think as a profession, we can all get smarter together and become better at what we do together, as we share our practices, as we share the evidence of the results of those.
Excellent, thank you. I know that AIU has definitely benefited from those cohort meetings and the annual symposium. So thank you so much.
Mark, for our next question, 2020 has brought some significant changes to the field of education, given the coronavirus pandemic, social justice protests, and possibly even the recent election. What are your overall thoughts on how these changes might impact teacher preparation and program accreditation now and into the future?
Well, this has been a very challenging year in a lot of ways. And there are a lot of people who are really eager to see 2020 in the rearview mirror, I think, and go on to something else. But I think when we look in that rearview mirror, we're actually going to see some really interesting things. And first of all, I have to say, in the middle of it all, I'm always so proud to be a part of the profession of educator preparation, because the resilience, the resourcefulness, the creativity, the collaboration that's gone on has been really inspiring. Educators are used to responding in the moment and to scrambling when you need to scramble to get things done for kids, for families, for schools, and across the board, we've seen that so much. So I think coming out of this, as part of that scrambling, let me see, I had a couple of things jotted down here. We're going to come out with a sharper focus on using technology better. I think we've made some real gains in the use of technology. It's been a huge challenge, but we've made some real gains in the use of technology. So I think we're going to be more purposeful. We've always said, gee, we ought to be doing more with distance technology in preparing teachers, but we haven't really had the focus. Well, now we've got the focus. Now you can stop any teacher that you run into and say, what are the top 5 things you need to know about using distance technology with kids? And they'll have their 5. And the 5 might vary from person to person, but nobody's going to be short of specifics anymore. So we're not preparing in theory. We're actually preparing against a very real background. And I think we'll incorporate even some really useful things into educator preparation along the way. And one of the things, especially for those of us in the higher ed realm, people have come to understand the real strengths of online education in ways that I think weren't widespread. Those of us who participated in it in an ongoing way and over a long time have understood the depth of the resources and the possibilities there. I think a long-term impact just for the field of education in general, but including higher ed, is going to be more recognition of things that we can pull forward and really enrich our standard practice with. So that's going to be good. We're also going to go forward with a deeper understanding of the disparities in kids' lives, because the discrepancies in life circumstances, disparities of access to all kinds of resources have been just become so apparent to us in this time. I think there's going to be an increased sensitivity to that. And that's where, when you talk about the social justice moves, the Black Lives Matter movement, the many expressions of concern over justice and injustice, over disparities, we're going to come out of this saddened in a way, but sobered, and I think ready to really double down on pushing harder and knowing where to push for some stronger equality opportunities there. So I think education as a field has been stressed and stretched a lot by what's going on in 2020. But because of the growth that's come through that, we're going to bring, I hate to talk about silver linings. I don't think that's the appropriate way to think about it quite. But there are going to be some strong things that we carry forward. When it comes to accreditation has been right in the soup with everybody else. We've had to learn to do things digitally. We've had to turn quickly to do things virtually. AAQEP had a little bit of a leg up there because we've been doing things virtually for a little longer time than some, so things went quite well. But there again, across the board, what we're hearing from other accreditors, wow, when you do a meeting by Zoom, you can get more people to show up because the principal didn't have to fight crosstown traffic to get to the meeting on campus to meet with the accreditation team, right? You can just say, close the door, I'm in my office, here I am, I'm with you. So we've seen some wonderful things come out of it, increased participation, more and more perspectives brought forward. We've learned to be a little more flexible and say, oh, we can schedule meetings in some different ways. So sorry to go into so many specifics here, but there's been some real gains we can bring forward. And so I think, as one of our members said in a meeting we had, well, we're not going to go back to normal. what we're going to do is go forward to a new way of doing things that's going to pull a lot of good lessons along with us. So I hope that answered the question, John.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm hearing from a lot of teachers this idea that we're going to go back to normal, and unfortunately, I don't think that that's going to be the case for us. So, in light of the pandemic, what are some of the long-term effects that we're going to see in the P12 environment, and how can AQEP help us to handle some of those challenges and celebrate those opportunities?
Well, just to lighten it up for a minute, as a kid who grew up in Minnesota, one of the things I'm most concerned about is that kids growing up in Minnesota tomorrow will not have snow days. Now, I'm not sure what AQEP can do to help that, but I think seriously, we're going to see, and in the South it's hurricane days. Although if the power's out, I guess that's a little different. But you know, we're going to see some increased levels of service, increased use of technology in a lot of ways. It's going to mean that any educator preparation program is going to have to be really serious about not just ed tech in terms of classroom ed tech, but really serious about some of the platforms. And here's what's really cool about that. A lot of the platforms that are useful to use in the classroom, if they're internet based, right, if they're web based, are also platforms that you can adapt to using in a digital environment and to directing kids to engage and interact with each other. So I think the increased attention to technology is going to really help us there. Let me see if there was anything else I was going to put down. So in terms of accreditation per se, since that was part of the question, I think we can support that in a couple of ways. One, we have standards that really emphasize the importance of connecting preparation to local school needs and practices. And so, you know, I think the role that accreditation plays in that is, you know, we in our standards have said, hey, you have to be really embedding the preparation with what's going on with the learner. And whether that's in a local context or whether that's with, you know, a nationwide reach, it can work well either way, but it says, hey, let's keep focused on what those needs are. A second thing about accreditation, one of the challenges you sometimes have in accreditation is you can have frameworks that put a lid on innovation. So for the commitments we've made as an accreditor, and this is very much in keeping with where the national conversation on accreditation is going, is to say, hey, support innovation, reward innovation. Say, if any of your listeners are, or you are familiar with Tony Reich's work in improvement science, that's a whole very exciting movement in education, and not just at the higher ed level. It's really rooted in the work in the P12 level that says, we're going to get places faster if we can do some rapid prototyping, if we can do some quick learning, if we can assess improvements and really move on with kids and find out what's working for these kids in this place. And as we adopt some of those practices as well and encourage it, I think we can be a support there. And then the third thing that we as an accreditor want to do is make sure we do everything we can to connect people with each other so they learn from each other, from the innovations that are happening all across the country.
Thank you so much.
And Mark, we talked a little bit about the impact of the pandemic. What long-term impacts of social justice reform do you envision for the P12 education moving forward? And how can AQEP help with these impacts?
That's an interesting question. And it's been interesting watching the unfolding events sort of through two lenses. As you know, as educators, the concern for social justice, the concern for anti-racism, the concern for overcoming disparities and for attention to disparities are deeply, deeply embedded in the field of education and educator preparation. We've been listening to those voices and pushing those conversations for a long time. What I would like to think will happen is that as the broader public awareness has increased, we'll be in a place to push policies forward that can not only at the local school level, but in our state systems and in our local systems, really strengthen you know, what we need to do to sustain more equality, to really infuse the curriculum with content. We're at kind of an exciting point because underlying what's been going on in education, there's been a resurgence of attention to the whole child, a resurgence of attention to social emotional learning, a resurgence of attention to differentiation. So I think the field of education was at a really good place to catch the wind that's there, to maybe move things forward. So I think it's now incumbent on all of us. to communicate with policymakers to help them know what they can do to support the improvements. And some of that goes beyond education. Some of that goes to awareness of other policies that impact families and that impact resources, in the community. So I think we need to capitalize on that. One of the things that someone wrote some time back, I apologize for blanking on the guy's name, wrote that part of every public educator's job is educating the public about education and educating the public about what kids and families need, and do that. So I think that's going to be the impact, right? The attention that we can garner for this work now is really, really important. And we're so excited, just to turn to higher education for a minute and to AAQEP's members and what they're doing. We're so excited because one of the things that our standards says is you have to be engaged with your school partners in addressing issues of disparity, in finding some way to put that as a filter on your work and a guide for your work. We've seen some amazing stuff. We've seen some of our members that are so deeply embedded in the community that they're bringing family members of P-12 students into their education courses to help learners understand what's going on. We've seen members that are pulling community members and across the campus into common focus on anti-racist practices that can be embedded across the board and with all their partners. So we're seeing some really, really good things going on. So I think one part of your question was, well, can accreditation do anything useful in all of this, right? And that's always our question. Can we play some positive role? I think we've got our standards aligned in such a way that it's really opening the conversation around quality to really make this work central. But at the same time, we're never standing still. So we're just at the process, or just at the point in our process where you have to start thinking about what do we do in the next iteration of our standards, because that's kind of the framework that guides the conversation. And so I think we've got some really important and really great work to do there, and some members who can really guide us a lot in doing that. So we can say, okay, how do we frame the conversation to ratchet it up one step further or two steps further as we move forward with these important concerns and great opportunities, and do so with great hope.
Thank you, Mark. I love that collaborative perspective. Thank you.
Absolutely, and I think you touched on so many parts. So many parts of the reason that AIU was just so attracted to AAQEP as an accrediting body, the sense that we're looking at the context in which education takes place, and we're looking at innovation, and we're looking at community building opportunities. For an online school, sometimes that's a challenge, but with Dr. Jones's leadership, we have really, I think, taken great strides with that. So thank you. So my next question is, what are some of the most effective responses you're seeing from schools, communities, and teacher preparation programs in dealing with major disruptions to the status quo?
This is such an interesting question, and Kristen and I were having a conversation about it just earlier today. And I think I want to answer it in a couple of ways. Because we've had repeated meetings with our members, last spring when the disruptions first hit and people were trying to figure out, what are we going to do with clinical placements? How can we support schools, because the schools are suddenly being thrown into different modes of learning. And then we've continued to meet with members over the summer and into the fall. The main thing that we've seen that's been effective is simply flexibility and responsiveness, because whatever is true in the school today might not be true tomorrow. I'll give you just a little example, and this is an example from a teacher that I was in communication with, because I do a little online teaching as well to keep myself in touch with things. I'm talking with a teacher in an assessment class. 1 week we're talking about how he can start using formative assessment in his middle school mathematics classes. The next week he gets online, I say, how's it going? And he says, I'm actually home with COVID. I came down with it, and my whole school is home. Everybody's in quarantine. He said, so I taught algebra today anyway. And the next week, 2 weeks later, rather, everybody he was better, thankfully. You can't count on that, but he had recovered well. And he's back in school teaching. I'm saying, wow, there you are, you're home, but because everybody else is home, you're just online teaching anyway and keeping going. And he didn't happen to have a student teacher with him at the time, but in all the places where we've seen folks that are working with interns and student teachers, it's the same thing. You don't know who's going to be in quarantine. You don't know who's going to be in class. You don't know if the building's going to be open or the building's going to be closed. So what we've seen that's so impressive is really the fruit of ongoing partnerships where people say, okay, we don't know what this ride is going to be like, but you, the student teacher, are connected with this teacher and whatever it takes to get the job done. Sometimes that's included great things like getting teacher preparation candidates, whether they're in the student teaching mode or not, linked up to do tutoring support for the kids that really need the most one-on-one education. So we've seen that. We've seen teacher candidates who are sometimes a little bit more digital native than some of the teachers they're working with, really stepping in and helping provide technical support, right? It's been very much that all hands on deck, whatever it takes. We'll partner together, we're going to work it out. And so just that responsiveness alone and resourcefulness has been just an inspiration to watch.
Yeah, it's amazing, even in a state of uncertainty and chaos, that there's still resiliency, and I like that all hands on deck, everybody's coming together and working together. Beyond the pandemic and social justice response, what do you think the future holds for education?
Well, I did allude to one thing earlier that I guess I'll pick up in response here. I have been so heartened by a couple of trends that have been going on in education that I think will only be supported and accentuated as we move forward. One is the turn to attention on social emotional learning, in addition to, not instead of, but in addition to academic learning. For a few years we had really a pretty narrow focus on one domain of learning and a almost obsession with one way of assessing and looking at that. So I think we've gotten over that. We've come back to a healthier place. And part of that has included reinvigorating some instructional conversations that we were having maybe 20 years ago. Jeanette, you would remember these as well, where we were more engaged in performance tasks, more engaged in project-based learning, more engaged in some types of learning that are just better, stronger for kids, that invite more collaborative learning, and then in teachers being engaged in more structured formative assessments and responsive formative assessments ways. So I think these are some of the things that are moving forward. We've also had a lot of talk about personalized education, but personalized education has been sort of a sideline and the focus of sort of a smaller subset of quote unquote innovative sectors or segments. I think that's gonna come home in more schools now in a bigger way. So, and I think we know now how to leverage some tools in ways we didn't before. So going forward, I would say better integration of technology. You can use technology for technology's sake, but now I think we can do better integration of technology in support of the whole child, in support of some deeper learning, without it becoming so individualized. Because one of the challenges, if you think about personalized, that's good. If we isolate individuals and their learning, not so good, or not so good all the time if it's the main focus. So I think this greater connectedness, greater emphasis on some richer, cognitively richer, but also socially richer and emotionally richer learning is going to be very important, and help young people, whether in the elementary level or secondary level, to become more self-directed in their learning. And formative assessment plays a great role there as well. So teachers are doing some amazing things, and ed prep programs are doing some amazing things in supporting teachers and preparing candidates for those things. And those are some of the hopeful directions I think we're moving.
Thank you. For my last question, what do you see as the occupational outlook for teachers in the near future? Are there any areas of education that you see as becoming more or less in demand?
We've had a really persistent set of shortage areas for a long time. Those are special education, of course, early childhood education, STEM education, and ESL and bilingual education. So I think those are going to continue to be areas that if a teacher wants to prepare, if a teacher in training wants to prepare her or himself well, being attentive to the ability to teach all kids by having not only the base preparation, but also those strong additional certifications will be really helpful. I'm afraid we're going to continue to see needs, especially in our rural communities and more isolated communities, that are a real challenge. And so I think the demand there is going to be strong, and the ability of preparation providers to extend their reach and to be present in those communities is going to be very, very important, because those are places where teachers are greatly needed, but it's not necessarily so easy to draw people back, or to or for folks in the community to make the career transition while they're doing the job that they're doing now. So those are going to be really important things. Not sure if that quite caught your question, but those are some things that I see.
Absolutely, thank you.
Our final question, what advice do you have for teachers in training? And are there any associations that our candidates might want to consider joining, or any special skills that we should be developing?
I think the main piece of advice I would have is all teachers are superheroes, but don't be a superhero alone. It's really about learning to collaborate and about finding the places where you can connect with others. There's a wonderful framework called professional capital put forward by Fullen and Hargraves that talks about the need for sort of 3 levels of engagement by teachers. The first is preparing yourself well to have the knowledge and skills that you need so that you can make your contribution and your part. The second level is the social capital, knowing how to work well and collaborate well with others. So developing that from the very beginning. How do you leverage your strengths to the benefit of others and gain from what others have to bring as well, so that can be done. And the third level they talk about is decision-making capital as rounding out the picture. So understanding issues well enough to engage with others to guide and direct your own learning. So I think in light of that, there are some really important associations that new teachers and practicing teachers can be involved in. Some of them are the standard sort of teacher groups that have been around for a long time. Like if you're a math teacher, the National Council for Teachers of Mathematics, well worth joining and being a part of, because the professional resources that are incredible. And there are similar associations for English. I was a member of the National Council of Teachers of English for a long time, and Joanna too. Yep, there's English teachers everywhere, aren't they? The social studies group, if you're interested in special education, wow, the Council for Exceptional Children is just a fantastic place to belong and to join. But there are also the connections that people can make locally. And I think in terms of special sets of skills, I think just the ability, that ability might not sound like a special skill, but the ability to really collaborate well with others, and to know that the days when we would close ourselves in a classroom by ourselves and sink or swim, that model unfortunately is going to take a long time to fade out entirely, but it's on its way out. And so the important thing is to be the superhero that's part of a team. Not the standalone, because that's where you draw your strengths, and that's where you draw your hope. And it's one of those things that in the democratic vision of education, John Dewey advocated for so long. He said, the real key to moving ahead is in knowing that when we do things together, we can do more than if we do them alone. Or as to make one last AAQEP connection, the chair of our accreditation commission, Dr. Joe Lubig, always says, all of us are always smarter than any of us. And that it sounds like a simple lesson, but it's one that really guides us. And those associations are wonderful. I'll give a shout out to one more group that any teacher should be looking at and thinking about. That's the National Board for Professional Teaching Standards, which is a great thing to set your sights on as you become a teacher, to see if you can engage in that process and gain that additional board certification. But what they all have in common is that idea that we don't do it alone. We succeed together, and we're much the happier for it.
I love it. Thank you. That's great advice. Appreciate it.
Dr. LaCelle-Peterson, I cannot tell you how thankful we are. We are just so honored to have your insights about the outlook for education moving into 2021. And I just want to say, on behalf of American Intercontinental University, we wish you, Kristen, and AAQEP all of the best moving forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you.